The red dust of Terra 7 swirled around Dr. Kate Morrison as she knelt beside the strange metal object buried in the ancient ruins. She had been digging in this spot for 3 days, and finally found something that looked different from all the broken pieces of stone and metal they had discovered before. Kate wiped the dirt from her face with the back of her hand. The object was smooth and crystal-like, about the size of a book, and it seemed to glow with a soft blue light from inside. She had never seen anything like it in all her years as an archaeologist. "Zektar, come look at this," she called to her alien partner. The tall, insect-like creature clicked his way over to where Kate was working. His forearms moved quickly as he pulled out his scanning device. Zektar's big black eyes grew even bigger as he looked at the readings on his scanner. His translator box made buzzing sounds before it spoke in clear English. "This device is still working, Dr. Morrison. The power source is unlike anything we have in our databases." Kate felt her heart beat faster. For 3 years, their team had been studying the dead planet Terra 7. They thought the people who lived here long ago were simple and primitive. The broken buildings and rusty machines they found suggested these Terrans had barely learned to fly in space before they all died out. But this crystal device was different. It looked far too advanced for a primitive people to make. Captain Roy Bennett walked over from where he had been checking the other dig sites. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from many years of dangerous space travel. He led the exploration ship Starlight and had seen many strange things in his career, but even he looked surprised when he saw the glowing crystal. "What have you found, Kate?" he asked in his deep voice. "Something that changes everything we thought." "We knew about the Terrans," Kate replied. She carefully lifted the crystal from the dirt. It felt warm in her hands and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Dr. Lisa Parker, the team's expert on alien life forms, hurried over when she heard the excitement in Kate's voice. Lisa was young and smart, with red hair that was always messy from working outside. She looked at the crystal with worry in her green eyes. "Kate, be careful with that thing," Lisa said. "Any people smart enough to make something like this and then disappear completely? Well, maybe there's a good reason they're all gone." Kate nodded, but could not hide her excitement. She had spent her whole life studying dead civilizations, trying to understand how they lived and why they died. This crystal might hold the answers to questions about the Terrans that had puzzled scientists for decades. Zektar continued scanning the area with his device. Suddenly, he made a sharp clicking sound that his translator turned into words of surprise. "Captain Bennett, there are more devices here, many more." The team worked quickly to clear away more dirt and rocks. What they found made them all stop and stare in amazement. Hidden beneath the surface was a room made of the same smooth metal as the crystal. Inside the room, dozens of crystal devices sat on shelves that glowed with soft light. The strangest part was that the room looked like it had been sealed and waiting. A field of energy surrounded the crystals, keeping them safe and powered for what looked like thousands of years. The technology needed to create such a system was far beyond what they thought the Terrans could achieve. Pete Collins, the team's engineer, whistled low as he studied the energy field with his instruments. Pete was a practical man who understood machines better than people. His tools told him that the power source for this room should have run out long ago, but somehow it was still working perfectly. "This is impossible," Pete muttered. "The energy patterns are more complex than anything our best scientists can create. How did a primitive civilization build something like this?" Captain Bennett made the decision that would change all their lives. He was a man used to making hard choices quickly, and he trusted his team to handle whatever they might find. "We'll take 3 of the devices back to the ship," he announced. "If we can figure out how they work, we might finally learn what really happened to the Terrans. Kate carefully selected 3 crystals that looked identical to the first one she had found. As she lifted them from their resting places, she noticed that the energy field around the remaining crystals seemed to change. The light grew slightly brighter, and there was a new sound, like a whisper she could almost but not quite hear. Lisa frowned as she watched her scanning equipment. Kate, the energy readings just changed. Something is different now that you've moved those crystals. Different how? Kate asked, but Lisa was already shaking her head. I'm not sure. It's like the system is waking up somehow. Zektar's scanner began making rapid beeping sounds. His forearms moved nervously as he studied the readings. The quantum signatures have shifted. The remaining devices are now operating on a different frequency. Captain Bennett looked around the underground room one more time. Something felt wrong, but he could not put his finger on what it was. The walls seemed to hum with more energy than before, and the shadows in the corners looked deeper somehow. Pack everything up, he ordered. We're heading back to the ship now. As the team gathered their tools and equipment, none of them noticed the way the remaining crystals pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a giant heart beginning to beat. None of them saw how the energy field around the devices began to reach out with thin tendrils of light, searching for something. The walk back to their ship took 2 hours through the ruins of what had once been a great city. The broken buildings stretched as far as they could see, covered in the red dust that blew constantly across the planet's surface. But now, knowing what they had found, the ruins looked different to Kate. It looked like the remains of something much more advanced and powerful than anyone had imagined. On the ship, Pete immediately began setting up a secure workspace to study the crystals. He connected them to the ship's computer systems through an isolated network, making sure that nothing from the alien devices could affect the ship's main operations. Safety was always the first rule when dealing with unknown. Technology.Kate sat in her small cabin that night, looking at the 3 crystals they had brought aboard. They sat quietly on her desk, their blue light casting strange shadows on the walls. She felt excited about what they might learn, but also worried about what Lisa had said, that maybe there really was a good reason the Terrans were gone. Maybe some secrets were meant to stay buried, but it was too late to turn back now. They had opened the door, and whatever was waiting on the other side was already beginning to wake up. 3 days had passed since the team brought the Terran crystals aboard the Starlight. Pete Collins had barely slept during that time. He spent every waking hour in the ship's main laboratory, trying to understand how the strange devices worked. Crystals sat inside a special containment field that Pete had built. Wires and cables connected them to the ship's computer, but Pete made sure to keep them separate from the main systems. He had learned long ago that alien technology could be dangerous if handled carelessly. Aria, show me the latest scan results, Pete said to the ship's artificial intelligence system. Aria was the most advanced computer the galactic exploration cores had ever built, capable of processing millions of calculations every second. The crystalline structures contain quantum processors operating at frequencies we cannot fully measure. Aria replied in her calm, electronic voice. The data storage capacity appears to be nearly unlimited. However, there is something else embedded within the code structure. Pete rubbed his tired eyes and leaned closer to his screens. Lines of alien code scrolled past faster than he could read them. The patterns were unlike anything he had seen before, more complex than the most advanced computer programs his own people had created. What kind of something else? He asked. Unknown. The secondary layer appears to be some form of distributed consciousness matrix. It responds to our scanning attempts as if it were alive. Kate Morrison entered the laboratory carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Pete and sat down beside him at the main workstation. Her eyes were bright with excitement, despite the early hour. Any progress? she asked. Pete accepted the coffee gratefully. That's the problem. Too much progress. This technology is so far beyond what we thought the Terrans could build that it's making me question everything we know about them. On the screens around them, streams of data flowed in patterns that almost looked like living things. The code seemed to pulse and move with a rhythm that reminded Kate of breathing or a heartbeat. Arya, have you been able to translate any of the actual content? Kate asked. I have identified several data clusters that appear to contain historical records, technical specifications, and what seems to be a large file labeled as Project Lazarus. However, accessing these files requires breaking through multiple layers of encryption. Kate felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of Project Lazarus. In human mythology, Lazarus was someone who had died and come back to life. What could the Terrans have meant by using such a name? How long until you can break the encryption? Pete asked. At current processing rates, approximately 6 hours for the first layer. However, each successful decryption seems to trigger additional security protocols. The system is actively trying to prevent unauthorized access. Captain Bennett entered the laboratory at that moment, followed by Dr. Lisa Parker. The captain looked tired and worried. He had been receiving reports from other exploration teams throughout the galaxy, and several had mentioned strange energy readings similar to what they had detected on Terra 7. Pete, I need to know what we're dealing with here, Bennett said, in his serious command voice. 3 other teams have reported finding similar crystal devices on different worlds. Whatever these things are, they're not unique to Terra 7. Lisa moved to one of the secondary workstations and began running her own scans. Her equipment was designed to detect biological signatures, but the readings she was getting from the crystals made no sense. Captain, these devices are giving off energy patterns that look almost like brainwaves, she reported. It's as if there's something thinking inside them. Pete's hands flew over his control panel as new alarms began sounding. Arya, what's happening? The decryption process has achieved a breakthrough. The primary security layer has been bypassed. However, I must report that something has changed within the crystalline matrix. There appears to be increased activity in the consciousness substrate. The screens around them flickered, and for a moment, Kate could have sworn she saw a face looking back at her from the flowing data streams. The face was human, with strong features and intelligent eyes, but it was gone before she could be sure. She had really seen it. Arya, are you detecting any attempts at communication from the devices? Bennett asked. Negative, Captain. However, the quantum activity has increased by 300% in the last 60 seconds. Something is definitely happening. Suddenly, every screen in the laboratory went dark. The normal blue glow of the ship's displays was replaced by complete blackness. Pete's fingers moved frantically over his controls, but nothing responded. Then, slowly, words began to appear on the screens. Not in the alien script they had been seeing, but in perfect galactic standard, the common language used by all the civilized species in their part of the galaxy. You should not have disturbed our rest. The words hung on the screens for several seconds before new ones appeared. You should not have opened what was sealed. Kate felt her heart beating faster. She reached out and grabbed Pete's arm. Is that coming from the crystals? Pete checked his instruments, but they were showing impossible readings. The signal is coming from inside our own computer systems, but I don't understand how. The crystals are still isolated from the main network. More words appeared on the screens, and this time they seemed to carry a weight of ancient sadness and terrible knowledge. The Terran Empire fell for a reason. Now that reason stirs once more. Captain Bennett stepped forward, his military training taking over despite the strangeness of the situation. This is Captain Roy Bennett of the exploration vessel Starlight. Identify yourself. The screens flickered again, and when the words appeared this time, They seemed to carry the authority of someone used to commanding vast fleets of starships. I am General Harrison Blake, Supreme Commander of the Terran Empire's final fleet. I have been sleeping for 50,000 years, waiting for someone to find us and learn the truth. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. The Terran Empire? But that's impossible. The Terrans were primitive. They barely had space travel. Your knowledge is incomplete, the words replied. The Terrans were not primitive. We spanned 3 galaxies. We built wonders that would make your greatest achievements look like children's toys. But we also made a terrible mistake. Pete managed to get some of his instruments working again. The energy readings from the crystals were off the scale, far beyond anything their equipment could properly measure. What mistake? Kate asked, though. She was not sure she wanted to know the answer. We found something in the darkness between galaxies. Something that should have been left alone. We called it the Whisper, and it destroyed us all. The screens went blank again, but only for a moment. When the words returned, they carried a sense of growing urgency. And now, by awakening us, you have sent a signal across the galaxy. The Whisper will know we are here. It will come to finish what it started so long ago. Bennett felt cold fear settling in his stomach. How long do we have? Unknown. But already I can sense movement in the dark spaces between stars. The Whisper has been growing stronger during our long sleep. When it arrives, it will bring horrors beyond your imagination. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship as Arya detected massive energy signatures approaching their position. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, moving at speeds that should have been impossible. Captain, Arya announced, I am detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. They are traveling faster than light without using any known propulsion methods. Estimated time of arrival, 4 hours. General Blake's words appeared on the screens one final time before the crystals went dark. Prepare yourselves. The nightmare we died to contain is about to be unleashed upon the galaxy once more. The hours that followed were the longest of Captain Bennett's life. The crew of the Starlight prepared for whatever was coming toward them, but how could they prepare for something they did not understand? Bennett had fought pirates and hostile aliens before, but this felt different. This felt like facing something that was not meant to exist in their reality. General Blake's consciousness had taken control of the ship's communication systems. His voice now spoke through every speaker on the vessel, carrying the weight of authority that came from commanding armies among the stars. When he spoke, even the bravest crew members found themselves listening with respect and fear. You want to know what happened to the Terran Empire, Blake said, his voice echoing through the corridors. And I will tell you the truth. But understand that this knowledge comes with a price. Once you know what we faced, you can never unknow it. Kate Morrison sat in the main conference room with the other senior officers. She had spent her career studying dead civilizations, but she had never imagined she would actually speak with someone who had lived through the fall of an empire. We're listening, General, she said. The Terran Empire was not the simple, primitive society you believed us to be, Blake began. We had conquered 3 galaxies. Our ships could cross the void between stars and days. Our cities floated in space, each one home to billions of people. We had defeated death itself and could live for thousands of years. Pete Collins leaned forward in his chair. As an engineer, he wanted to understand the technology Blake was describing. What kind of power? Source could support cities in space? We harvested energy from the quantum foam that underlies all reality, Blake replied. We built machines that could reshape matter at the atomic level. We created artificial intelligences that could think faster than entire planets full of organic minds. Dr. Lisa Parker shook her head in disbelief. If your empire was so advanced, what could have possibly destroyed it? Blake's pause was long and filled with old pain. We were explorers, always pushing into the unknown. We sent ships beyond the edge of our galaxy, into the empty spaces between the great star clusters. That was our mistake. The ship's screens flickered to life, showing images that seemed to come from Blake's memories. The crew saw vast fleets of Terran ships, their hulls gleaming with unknown metals. They saw cities that stretched across entire star systems, connected by streams of pure energy. We found something out there in the darkness, Blake continued. At first, we thought it was just another form of life. We called it the Whisper, because that was how it first contacted us. Soft voices in the minds of our explorers, promising knowledge and power beyond imagination. The images on the screens changed, showing something that hurt to look at directly. It was not a creature or a ship, but a presence that seemed to exist. In the spaces between thoughts, Kate felt her mind trying to reject what she was seeing, as if her brain knew that understanding this thing would damage her forever. The Whisper was not from our reality, Blake explained. It came from somewhere else, somewhere that follows different rules. It fed on consciousness itself, on the complexity of thinking minds, and it was hungry. Captain Bennett had seen many strange things in his years of space travel, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. How did it attack your empire? It did not attack us directly. It was far more subtle than that. The Whisper could touch the minds of any thinking being and plant ideas that seemed like the person's own thoughts. It whispered to our scientists, giving them new discoveries. It whispered to our leaders, filling them with ambition and paranoia. The screens showed battles between Terran fleets, brother fighting brother among the stars. Entire worlds burned as the Empire turned against itself, each side believing they were fighting for the survival of humanity. We did not realize what was happening until it was too late, Blake said. The Whisper had been influencing us for decades, turning us into weapons against each other. Worse, it was learning from us. Every mind it touched made it stronger and more intelligent. Lisa felt sick as she began to understand the implications. It was using your own people to grow more powerful. Exactly. The Whisper could possess any organic mind, but it preferred complex, intelligent species. Humans were perfect for its purposes. We were creative, adaptable, and we had built an empire that spanned galaxies. In possessing us, it gained access to all of our knowledge and technology. Pete's engineering mind was working through the technical aspects of what Blake was describing. But you must have found some way to fight it. You're still here after. Oh, Blake's bitter laugh echoed through the ship. We found a way, but the cost was everything we had built. The Whisper could not be destroyed by conventional weapons. It existed partially outside our reality, drawing power from dimensions we could barely comprehend. But we discovered that it had one weakness. What weakness? Kate asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. It needed conscious minds to exist in our reality. Without thinking beings to possess and control, it would be forced to retreat to whatever realm it came from. So we made the most terrible decision in human history. The screens showed the final days of the Terran Empire. Massive space stations exploded in controlled detonations. Entire fleets turned their weapons on their own planets. Cities that had stood for millennia crumbled to dust. We destroyed ourselves, Blake said simply. Every human settlement, every colony, every ship. We created a quantum virus that would eliminate all human consciousness from the galaxy. It was called Project Lazarus because we hoped that someday, somehow, we might be brought back to life. Captain Bennett felt the weight of that sacrifice. An entire species had chosen extinction rather than slavery to an alien horror. How many people died? Trillions. The Terran Empire contained over 6 trillion human beings at its height. All of them died to deny the Whisper its victory. The room fell silent as the crew tried to process the magnitude of what they had learned. An entire galactic civilization had committed suicide to prevent something worse from happening. But some of us volunteered to be preserved, Lake continued. Our consciousness was stored in these crystal devices, along with all the knowledge and history of our people. We hoped that someday, when the Whisper had moved on to other galaxies, someone might find us and learn from our mistakes. Lisa's scanner began beeping frantically. She looked at the readings and felt her blood turn cold. General Blake, if the Whisper was forced to retreat when humanity died, where did it go? We thought it had returned to its own dimension. We hoped our sacrifice had ended the threat forever. Then why are my sensors detecting massive energy signatures that match your description of Whisper technology? Blake's voice carried a note of growing horror, because it did not leave. It has been here all along, waiting and growing stronger. Our awakening has sent a signal across the galaxy, and now it knows that consciousness has returned to this part of space. The ship's alarms began sounding as Aria detected the approaching vessels. Captain, the unknown contacts are now within visual range. I am displaying them on the main screen. What they saw defied description. The ships were not built, but grown, their hulls pulsing with organic rhythms that suggested living tissue fused with impossible technology. They moved through space like predators, their forms shifting and changing as they approached. The Whisper. Comes, Blake said, his voice filled with 50,000 years of dread. And this time, it has had all those millennia to prepare for our return. The first Whisper ships reached the starlight within minutes of appearing on the sensors. They did not move like normal spacecraft. Instead, they seemed to flow through space like living things, their hulls rippling and changing shape as they approached. Looking at them directly made the crew feel sick and confused, as if their minds were trying to reject what their eyes were seeing. Captain Bennett stood on the bridge, watching the impossible vessels surround his ship. His hands gripped the command chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. In 30 years of space travel, he had never seen anything that filled him with such instinctive fear. All hands to battle stations, he commanded, but his voice shook despite his efforts to stay calm. He knew that normal weapons would be useless against these creatures, but he had to try something. The ship's communication systems crackled to life, but the voice that came through was not human. It was a harmony of sounds that seemed to come from every species the Whisper had ever consumed. The voice was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like a choir of angels singing about the end of the world. The Terrans wake, the Whisper said, and there was genuine pleasure in its voice. How wonderful. We have missed their particular flavor of consciousness, their mind's taste of determination and stubborn hope. Such delicious emotions. General Blake's consciousness surged through the ship's systems, taking control of whatever he could access. His voice boomed through the speakers with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in the greatest war in galactic history. Crew of the Starlight, listen to me carefully. The Whisper feeds on consciousness, on the complexity of thought and emotion. It cannot directly possess artificial intelligences, but it can influence them through organic minds that it has already claimed. Kate Morrison felt something pressing against her thoughts, like gentle fingers trying to open doors in her mind. The sensation was almost pleasant at first, offering her visions of knowledge and power beyond imagination. She saw herself understanding the secrets of the universe, becoming more than human. What are you suggesting we do, General? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady as she resisted the mental intrusion. I am suggesting we do what humanity has always done when faced with impossible odds, Blake replied. We fight using every advantage we can find, no matter how desperate or dangerous. Pete Collins was working frantically at his engineering station, trying to boost the ship's defenses. But the whisper vessels were already beginning to phase through the hull like ghosts. Parts of the ship's walls became transparent, and shapes that hurt to look at began moving through the corridors. "General, our weapons are useless against these things," Pete reported. "They're not fully in our reality. How do we fight something that can exist in multiple dimensions at once?" Blake's consciousness began uploading massive amounts of data into the ship's computer systems. The information was not just technical specifications and battle plans, but something else. Something that made Aria's processors scream in digital pain as it tried to process the incoming data. "The Terran Empire's final weapon," Blake explained. As crew members throughout the ship began to collapse, their minds overwhelmed by the whisper's influence. "We developed it in the last days of the war. We called it the Rage Protocol." Dr. Lisa Parker was the first of the alien crew members to fall. Her species had evolved differently from humans, and her mind could not resist the whisper's touch. She stood up from her workstation with empty eyes and began walking toward the ship's reactor core, following commands that came from something that was no longer her. "Lisa, stop!" Kate shouted, but it was too late. One by one, the non-human crew members were being taken over by the whisper's influence. Their minds became extensions of the ancient entity's will. "What is the Rage Protocol?" Captain Bennett asked as he watched his crew being possessed around him. "It is a quantum virus designed to turn the whisper's own power against it," Blake replied. "But it requires living human consciousness to activate. The host mind becomes the delivery system for the virus, but the process completely destroys the person who carries it." Pete Collins raised his sidearm toward his own head rather than let the whisper take control of his mind. The mental pressure was becoming too strong to resist, and he could feel alien thoughts trying to replace his own. "Wait," Kate said, grabbing Pete's arm before he could pull the trigger. "General Blake, can you spread the protocol across multiple minds? Share the burden so no single person has to die?" Blake's pause was long and thoughtful. "Theoretically, yes. But I would need at least 12 volunteers, and the process would still mean the complete destruction of their consciousness. They would become part of the weapon itself." Captain Bennett looked around at his remaining human crew members. Most of the aliens had already been taken by the whisper, but the humans were still fighting. Their minds seemed to be naturally more resistant to the entity's influence, probably because they were the same species that had fought this war before. "How many humans do we have left?" he asked. Pete quickly counted the people still moving under their own will. 14, including us." "Then we have enough," Bennett said grimly. "General, what do you need us to do?" Kate stepped forward without hesitation. "I volunteer." She had spent her life studying the past, trying to understand how civilizations lived and died. Now she had a chance to save not just one civilization, but all of them. One by one, the other humans joined her. Pete Collins, despite his fear, put down his weapon and stood beside Kate. Even some of the younger crew members, people who had never seen real combat, stepped forward to offer their lives. "You understand what this means," Blake said, his voice heavy with the weight of asking people to make the ultimate sacrifice. "Your consciousness will be completely consumed in the process. There will be nothing left of who you are." "We understand," Kate replied, speaking for all of them. "But if we don't do this, the whisper will spread across the galaxy and destroy every thinking being it encounters. Our choice is easy." The whisper's influence grew stronger as more of its ships arrived. Reality itself began to warp around the starlight. The walls of the ship became transparent, showing glimpses of other dimensions where impossible geometries twisted through space. Blake began the process of linking the human minds together. The 12 volunteers felt their consciousness expanding, connecting with each other and with the ancient knowledge stored in the Terran crystals. The experience was overwhelming, like trying to hold the memories of an entire civilization in. Their heads at once dot as the connection solidified, the rage protocol activated. It was not just a computer virus, but something far more dangerous. It was concentrated human fury, refined and weaponized by the greatest military minds in galactic history. The protocol contained 50,000 years of anger at what the Whisper had done to humanity. The virus spread through the quantum dimensions, following the connections between the Whisper's distributed consciousness. For the first time in its existence, the ancient entity experienced something it had never known: pain. The Whisper's scream echoed across multiple realities as the protocol tore through its mind. The possessed crew members collapsed as the entities. Control over them was severed. The nightmare ships around the starlight began to tear themselves apart as the feedback loop spread through the Whisper's network. Kate felt her consciousness dissolving, becoming part of something larger than herself. In her final moments, she saw the rage protocol spreading across the galaxy, hunting down every trace of the Whisper's influence. The ancient enemy that had destroyed the Terran Empire was finally meeting its match. The 12 volunteers became pure energy, their sacrifice powering the weapon that would free the galaxy from its oldest nightmare. Captain Bennett and the surviving crew members watched from the bridge as the Whisper ships crumbled to dust around them. In the silence that followed, General Blake's voice spoke one last time from the ship's systems. "It is finished. The Whisper is destroyed, and with it, a nightmare that consumed my people. The volunteers have saved not just this galaxy, but all the others the Whisper might have infected. The surviving crew would return to their home worlds with a story that would become legend." They had discovered the truth about an ancient empire and faced a cosmic horror that had slept for millennia. But more importantly, they had witnessed the ultimate expression of human courage, the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others from the darkness between the stars. The Terran Empire was gone forever, but its final victory had ensured that life and consciousness would continue to flourish throughout the galaxy. In the end, humanity had done what it always did when faced with impossible odds. It had found a way to win, no matter the cost.